Death is for the Dying Epitaph, a mini episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Richmond, and with me today is the podcast producer, Marco. Hey, Marco. How's it going?
Hello. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So, today we're talking about the Death, Race, and Cemeteries episode
It
of the podcast.
is. Hmm.
And while I was listening to Jennifer talk, I was reminded of a quote by William Gladstone, um, which is, "Show me the manner in which a nation cares for its dead, and I will measure with mathematical exactness the tender mercy of its people, their respect for the law of the land, and their loyalty to high ideals." Now, obviously, given how America tends to view Black lives,
Mm.
it's not surprising from what, listening to her and realizing how little Americans and America cares about Black cemeteries. But do you have anything that really struck you from our conversation?
Oh, for sure. And I think the recording captured a little bit of it, where she was describing how a black cemetery was built around, I guess, a plant of some kind, like
The
what?
plant was
Sorry,
the plant was built around the
the
cemetery.
plant was built around the cemetery, right? And I don't know what was a chemical plant or some kind of, I don't know,
Yeah.
manufacturing, whatever it was. And the fact that people had to make appointments to go see their loved ones, final resting site with the company. And they had to coordinate that. And I was just like, wow, okay. Like I've seen developments of like houses and stuff like that go up around farmland that I kind of grew up with. And usually on those parcels of land, there would be like a corner lot that was a cemetery because that was the place where all the farmers' families got buried, kind of thing. And so those things are kind of preserved in a sense where like, it's cordoned off, but it's still accessible to people. You can still go to it. But the fact that this particular example that she gave us just completely encircled a
Yeah.
cemetery, I mean, whether you're black or white, it doesn't matter. Like it's the respect. Like it's just the respect for the dead. And it bothered me to hear that. It bothered me to hear that. And I just couldn't conceive of how those families can feel about this and the fact that they have to make these arrangements and that
Yeah.
they are being singled out essentially.
And disappeared. I mean, she was also talking about, you know, if nobody knows where a cemetery is, and by nobody, I mean if the state doesn't know where the cemetery is,
Right.
then, just sell it off to developers. Developers aren't going to say anything about it. Too much trouble for them. The cemetery disappears.
Yeah. Well, that's because
And
she was also working on that project, the National Registry of,
yeah,
or maybe was it the Louisiana Registry of Cemeteries, where, they could keep track of all of the cemeteries that are within the state boundaries kind of thing. And being a GIS person, that is like super interesting to me to see
yeah,
how they're all kind of spread around and what the cultural significance they have and what they represent in those specific locations.
yeah,
And I haven't checked out her site yet, but I would like to go and take a look at the application that she created that allows people to kind of visualize it because that's the thing, like you said, like these cemeteries can be brushed underneath the carpet real easy, but
yeah,
if you put them on a map, they will exist in perpetuity,
yeah,
right? So that another reason why GIS is here to save the world.
Yes. And for those of you who do not know it, GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. And both Marco and I work for a company that makes software for GIS,
Yes, exactly.
just in case you were unfamiliar with the term.
Correct.
So we're very passionate about geography, and I do think it's a really good example of using geography to record what is in a fight for social justice,
Correct.
because a lot of social justice, like, you have to have the documentation to say this did happen. And so that's, I think it's a really clever use of GIS for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd be very curious to see like how even within the cemetery, not just like at a macro scale where you take a look at like, the distribution of cemeteries in different neighborhoods and different parishes, I guess, in Louisiana, but also within the cemetery itself, like how it's like maybe divided off based off of religion, or, is this a particularly, Jewish cemetery, or is it a Christian cemetery, or is it a Muslim cemetery? Are there different religions that house their dead here? Or is how long has it been there? Can we go back and find the history of the people that existed in these cemeteries? I don't know about you, but I remember in high school going to like a local cemetery and like doing like a study trying to find those people. Now, granted, back then didn't have the internet, couldn't search it up on Google, but it was interesting to kind of go to the library and try to find records of those people and what they did. And, for the vast majority of people that the area that I grew up in, it was all farmland, right? It was all farmers and stuff like that, and maybe a few mill work people here and there. But it was interesting to see also the correlation between like various events that happened. So like, the Spanish flu of 1919, right? Lot of kids didn't make it through that time,
Yeah.
and you saw that was the end date for a lot of folks. Um, so I feel like not only GIS, but just people in general can learn a lot about their communities by just visiting their local cemetery and understanding the history of it.
Yeah. And it's so during COVID, I actually went to my nearby cemetery because no one was there and it was like a green space.
Mm,
Um, so it was like safe, but it was also allowed me to be like out in nature. But I was looking and I found the cluster of the Spanish flu, with all of, like younger to middle-aged people all dying within a year of each other. And it was sort of weird to be looking at that. And then, given that this was the pandemic, also at the same time, there was a funeral going on.
mm,
And so just to think like our cemeteries are also going to show COVID.
yeah,
We're going to see a pool. It's maybe not going to be quite as easy because it did hit older populations, but we are going to see that reflected in our cemeteries.
yeah. That's fascinating. Not only like pandemics, but world wars as well and everything else like that. It is if you're just interested in history in general, like the cemeteries are a great place to get, to start and maybe catch the bug, the history bug.
Yeah, 100%. And I like looking at the names of the dead.
Hmm.
Um, and there's the sad ones, the children that died very young. Sometimes you'll get the mother as well. Um, but sometimes you get, like the clearly like matriarch, like getting the personality out of the stone.
Hmm.
There's a in North Carolina and in Chapel Hill, the graves, the cemetery. There was my favorite grave was for Mrs. Minerva something, and her husband lies here too. And I want to know so much about Mrs. Minerva.
She probably controlled the finances in the house, I would imagine.
There was a story there.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. Oh
yeah.
my God, that'd be great. Uh, I've always, since we are, branding this particular podcast series, I guess, between you and I as epitaphs, we haven't even talked about what we want on our epitaphs. Like, what would you want on your epitaph?
That's a great question. I love a funny one.
Me too.
Either that or some sort of memento mori, like so I am, so you will be kind of a thing.
So,
Internally reminding people that they too will die.
I was gonna say, trying to strike the fear of God into people. Like, yeah, you're
Exactly.
gonna be here soon. You just watch.
Yeah. You'll be joining me soon enough.
Exactly.
Um, but yeah, I'd probably want something a little bit funny. Something that shows a little bit of personality. I don't know off the top of my head, but you have you thought about it?
I have a little bit. Um, I kind of thought about going with, uh, Marco. He was a good dude. Like just very simple kind of epitaph, I guess. It's one of the things that I think about whenever I'm doing like those icebreaker games where you have to kind of like describe yourself in like 3 words or 4 words or something like that. And like I use those words or I think about like what I would want to put on my headstone to help describe the person, I guess, that I am, because that's how I want to be remembered. And I guess the words that I think about are kind, helpful, and what would be my last one? Creative, I think.
Yeah, creative's good.
I think that would be my three that I would put on my headstone. Those are the 3 words because they kind of encapsulate my personality and who I am. Kind of generic, and yeah,
They're all good
but
work. All good
they,
work.
I think so. I think so.
I would probably go in a different direction.
A little bit darker, perhaps.
Well, I was thinking, as a kid, my parents used to call me Zaphod Beeblebrox because apparently I was a little bit of an odd child, and I actually have ZB tattooed on my wrist for that. So I do think it would be funny to be Rebecca Zaphod Beeblebrox Richmond.
For those folks who don't know who Zaphod, or I always said Zapod, Beeblebrox, he was one of the main characters in Hitchhiker's Guide for the Galaxy. So if you have not read that book, it is absolutely awesome.
Yes.
Um, yeah, it's great. It's great.
There's a quote from it. Uh it's like a sign, it's just kind of random. Um, but there's a sign that says "Beware of the leopard." Maybe I'd put that on my as an epitaph.
Beware of the
Beware-
leopard.
Yeah,
Or you could do something maybe a little bit more traditional. So long and thanks for all the fish.
yeah, yeah.
A
I
bit overdone, bit overdone.
yeah,
Or just put the number 42 on your
yeah.
headstone somewhere. God, going deep into the woods of like Hitchhiker's Guide.
Hitchhiker's Guide nerdiness
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly. Didn't expect that to happen in this podcast.
No, no,
We went from race to Hitchhiker's Guide from the Galaxy. Is there any other podcast out there that's doing this? I don't
don't
think so.
think so. I do have another question for you though.
Sure.
What's your ideal cemetery?
What's my ideal cemetery? Wow.
What makes a good cemetery?
So I remember in the body disposal episode with Seth, he was talking about choosing your funeral service that matches your values, right? And he's like, if you were the kind of environmental person or environmentally conscious person who xeriscaped your yard, you probably wouldn't want to be in a cemetery that is constantly watered and mowed and stuff like that. I do like that. I I do. And the reason is because when I would visit my grandparents who lived in Toronto, they actually lived in the city, and I would, go stay there for weeks on end. I would take my bike and I would ride around the neighborhood and kind of go and see what I could see. I was very much kind of an exploratory kind of kid. I grew up in the sticks, and I on the weekend I would go and I would just kind of like not come back until sunset. And I kind of wanted to do the same thing when I was in the city. And I remember one time I ended up in a very large cemetery that spanned, I'm going to say, 2 or 3 city blocks. It's very narrow, but it's very long. And I just remember going through it and being like, this is absolutely incredible. It was like going to a park, essentially. And I was able to take my bike. There was no cars, or very few cars. And, I figured out it was a cemetery, obviously, but it was really well maintained. It was in the summertime, beautiful green grass, flowers everywhere. And at the south end of the cemetery, there were a bunch of buildings, and they were all kind of like they had stained glass in them. There was like a courtyard with a fountain, and there were hallways and stuff like that. And it wasn't until my grandfather passed away that I realized what they were. And they were actually crypts. And they were very well done. I always thought crypts, because you see the shows of Tales from the Crypt, you think it's all covered in cobwebs and like melted candles and stuff like that. But it was beautifully clean, beautifully organized. And that's where both my grandparents are resting right now. And I know where they are. I can go and see them whenever I need and whenever I want to. And I like the fact that A, it's indoors because I can go see them in the wintertime and it's not freezing. And B, there's like a little bench in these little, I guess the cryptoriums, like whatever the little rooms are where the crypts and the marble kind of slabs or headstones, I guess, for lack of a better term, are listed there. So I can just sit there and I can just talk to them if I wanted to. And so, because it's always been a positive experience for me, that's the kind of cemetery that I like. And whether I would be buried in one, I don't know, but maybe that particular cemetery just has more meaning to me.
Oh, yeah. See, where I grew up in New Mexico, and that kind of lawn maintenance is just it's a
It's not
waste of
feasible. Yeah.
no. But I like, well, we've talked about it before. I want to be buried in the forest.
Mm.
And so you will not be surprised that the cemeteries I love best are the ones that are unruly and hard to maintain. And everything's kind of helter skelter, and there's like different style. Like, what I really, really hate is flat lawn with all of the flat placards, just like row after row of identical placards.
Hmm.
Like, no. There's like you should be allowed to be individual in death. And so I love like old cemeteries where there's no like one style, and there's trees and the roots are knocking everything down. Um and I mean, you got to say like for atmosphere, the lawn ones have nothing on the wild ones.
True, but I also don't want to pee my pants if I'm going to be walking there through at night. Like,
That's the beauty of it, Mark. That's what you want. You
it's
want to
it's
have a bit of fear and mystery.
oh God, fear and mystery. You can keep that. I don't want any of that noise. God, no. I mean, it, what you're probably talking about is like more of a modern kind of cemetery, but most cemeteries have been there for a long time. And so you'll see a variety of like different
Yeah.
headstones and monuments and stuff like that. So there is some variety there, but not
I
a
like
lot.
the older ones where it really is a little bit disorganized and not like
Right.
everything's not in perfect rows and all the gravestones don't look alike. And there, as I said, there's trees, natural things have happened to the cemetery. Um,
S-
that's
See, I would want to take like
that
all my
that
yard
level of
tools.
decay, I just love it.
I would want to take all my yard tools and just like clean all that up. Like that's what I would want to do. This
And
is
I
what I
am
watch on
very
YouTube for fun. This is yard cleanup videos. Love them. Love them.
I cannot relate.
No, I know. I know. But, but should, I don't know if we should do this or not. Should we tell the audience about your idea of a cemetery?
Oh yeah. I was wondering where you're going for that. I
Yes.
I I have fantasized about owning my own cemetery and like making it's like woods and it has to be natural burial. You're not allowed to do it or like aquamation or cremation remains. Um and like pretty close to markerless or
Hmm.
very like or if there's like an interesting marker, but like the woods themselves are the place you come, not necessarily the specific spot. And so a place where you can really compost a tree,
Yeah,
very literally.
indeed. I, I feel like there should be also like a section where we could plant trees for people if they
Yeah,
wanted to be memorialized
yeah.
as a tree.
What I'd like to do is actually I'd like to take some deforested land and make use the cemetery as a way to reforest it.
See, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Nobody out there, don't steal that idea. That's our idea. Stop it. I
Or
know
if you
I could see the
do
wheels
it,
turning in your
let me
heads
know
there.
so that I can make sure that I get buried there.
Okay. Maybe, yeah, that's it. You want to have your own cemetery so you know, hey, this is where my final resting place is going to be.
Yeah. And I mean like I don't think I would achieve this goal before my parents both die, but it'd be nice to have, they could go there too. They're
Hmm.
both going to be cremated, so the request is that they both are put in the same place.
Simple enough.
And that is it for this episode of Death is for the Dying. Thank you for joining us. And as always, you can join in the conversation at Life is for the L on Threads and Instagram, or you can email us at lifeisforthelivingpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, we are also on YouTube, so you can leave some comments there, get the conversation going. Thanks as always. Talk to you later.
Bye, everybody. See ya.
Bye.